Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies, gentlemen, and friends. Sorry, I'm a bit rushed because I feel a bit like a sandwich panel. So I'm very glad to be part of this panel today because this topic is deeply personal. More women are getting married, setting up families at a later age, and will end up eventually being in a sandwich class, like Saranjit has mentioned, simultaneously caring for children below 12, as well as having parents above 65. I fit into that group. And in Singapore, women reach menopause earlier than the West, between the ages of 45 and 55, with 49 being the average age. In Singapore alone, over 50% of women whose quality of life and professional performance are affected by menopause hold mid to senior leadership roles. They disengage, step back, or leave without support. That's why today's massive topic is so important. You have heard now that more women have careers, more women are in leadership, but how are we to thrive with all these challenges that we face with menopause and all this midlife crisis? But we do not want to decline, but we want to do better at this prime time of our lives. So we have a great panel here with us today. Saranjit has done most of the introduction, but I do want to say a few things, a little bit more about them. Dr. Huang Zhongwei is not just a senior consultant in the Department of ONG and Fertility, and the Deputy Director of BioEcho Asia. He does research on menopause symptoms and how it disrupts both personal and professional lives. Professor Ang Seng Bing is a family physician, family medicine service and menopause center of KK Hospital in Singapore, and he has roles which are very integral and important in menopause. He's currently President-elect International Menopause Society, past President of the Asian Federation of Osteoporosis Societies, and Council Member of the Asia Pacific Menopause Federation. Associate Professor Raswana, she's also President of PPIS, Head of Public Security and Safety Program at the Singapore University of Social Sciences, and she's a committed educator, globally recognized for her work and dedication to promoting restorative justice. She currently serves as the chair of the Social Services and SIM Advisory Committee. So let's quickly get started into our questions. The first part of our panel will discuss menopause and well-being. So Dr. Ang, can you start us off with a bit of information about menopause? I hear that the symptoms are very diverse and sometimes very under-recognized.
Well, for a start, menopause is a stage where every woman will go through, right?
Yes, of course.
And it is a natural process. Yes, some majority of the women actually go through that without any issues, but some do experience discomfort and symptoms. This is almost like, if you remember, when you're younger, some women have PMS, and when they have PMS, you're going to avoid them for the few days. But not all women will go through that. So as we know, those who needs help, there are help available. And some of the symptoms that are very commonly known, well, in the public, we realize that when they heard of hot flushes, they'll come to us. So there'll be a bit of skew because people only remember when you get hot flush, suddenly get this heat, it comes suddenly, last few seconds it goes away, and some may have multiple times and it wakes you up at night. Even for the men, I just tell them, if I wake you up 3 times a night, I think after 1 week you'll be moody. So if your hot flush is doing that to that will affect you. But the most common symptoms, MUH, Zhongwei's group have done, is actually body aches and joint pains. Mood changes do occur in some group of the women. So sometimes those are the ones that leads to the issues with functioning. And that's also some of the reason when they have a nice husband or children, they will bring them to our consult room and say, can you help my mom because she's driving me crazy? And I think menopause, when you hear the age 49, in the past, we used to have children early when you are in your 20s. So by the time you are maybe 50, your children are already adults. But now we have children later in your 30s, and by the time you are menopausal, they are also teenagers. That also drive you up the wall. Those who have teenage kids, so that's where I think you see the coincidence of many things. And when you are also at that age, you are probably middle management. So a lot of things come together, and now with this physical discomfort, you are trying to cope with so many things in your life that sometimes we have to take a step back and see, what can we do to cope with my symptoms, the demands from my family, and my workplace?
Thank you. But from what I hear from friends, and also from a personal experience, being perimenopausal, there are some things which are very disruptive, from like menorrhagia, where it can be embarrassing, difficult to get through the day. And apart from that, someone actually had palpitations, anxiety attacks. So perhaps can you also share some of the psychological aspects of menopause?
Right. So I think it's a very personal experience for every woman. And I think being a gynecologist as well is that we see women through the entire life phases at some of the most sensitive parts of their life, from the from premenstrual syndrome, like what Sing-Bin has mentioned, and then now when she goes through the midlife after she's gone through everything as a woman, menstrual pain, cramps, bleeding, and then trying to get pregnant and have a baby and all the complications, that can happen in pregnancy, and then now at midlife, she has to go through another phase of all the hormonal changes that can happen. So there are enough studies that have shown that perhaps what a woman, before her personal experiences and her mental well-being could actually affect her later on at midlife. And as Sim has said, even life circumstances at a point may actually exacerbate some of these symptoms to be more severe. So I would say that these symptoms vary women by women, and we shouldn't classify everything as due to the menopause without thinking of other health problems first. So many times I would say that once a woman hits midlife, it is vital to also go for health screening, both to ensure that physically you're healthy and also emotionally you are well, because all this could actually contribute to the severity and exacerbation of whatever symptoms that you may have in terms of sleep issues. And I think that that's one of the biggest things that women complain. And this constant fatigue or lack of energy, they will always say that, I just feel very tired. Everything is draining me down. And then it just builds on. So it's become a spiral. So I think that is very important in how you cope in everyday life.
Can you give me a few examples of coping mechanisms? Or Professor Raswana?
I feel very safe next to two gynaes and who knows everything. I don't know whether they can assess what I'm going through right now. I would think that, so to be honest, I don't really know what exactly are the symptoms. I hear it from my friends, and I think one of the things that you notice at the very beginning is your weight gain. No matter what you do, you're not able to lose that weight. I used to do a lot of running, and in the past, during maybe Hari Raya or even like Deepavali or something, you just eat something and then you just go for a run, you're able to lose the weight. But this time around, it's not happening, nothing's happening. You get really, really tired as well. I do marathons, I climb mountains, all of those things are really exhausting right now. However, from friends, you try to hear from others and you feel like, okay, this will go away. And eventually you'll be able to, get over it. But having support from your family really matters. So I have grown up children, 27 and 24. They are really big boys. And they are very, very, they are very aware of what I'm going through and the challenges that I'm facing. And then at the same time, I do have a very good support mechanism. I belong to PPIS and I, to some extent, belong to SCWO. And I'm always surrounded with women, young or old, who's able to, empathize and support me. They encourage, whatever challenges that you're facing. One of the things that is hard for me is when the kids were younger, raising them was difficult. I raised them alone as a single parent. But now I have a mom she's 76, and she's completely the opposite of what empowered woman would be. I come from India. I mean, my parents are from India, so I can completely relate to what the keynote speaker was saying earlier. All of those things have happened. Mine was an arranged marriage. I had kids not planned, but having them young really helps. And then arranged marriage didn't last very long. Didn't know the father at all when we met twice. We got married, then we got divorced. So all of those things do happen. But now I've actually happy to say that I got married again 3 years ago to someone who's much older and very, very, very supportive. And not to mention that he's also not Asian. He's from Australia. Never married before, and he was looking after his mom who passed away when she was 98. So in that sense, the whole family has lived a very long life, and he knows the trouble, his mom went through, and his sister was so much older. He's looking after her as well, and he knows what I need to do in terms of, supporting me. So I think having that kind of support is really important, and being able to talk about it openly, not to be shy, but to share, even, I guess, with men.
Yeah, that's so true, having male allies, and this really ties in with the previous panel's topic of having male allies. But that's from the point of the home, where you have someone who can understand what you're facing during menopause. But how about at the workplace? How can men support women at the workplace? Can I have your perspective, Zong?
Right. So I think how men can come into the picture is that we should have the initiative to try to understand, the different circumstances, which is what previously, the panel was amazing. They were all talking from the male perspective, and the male voice coming in. And it just adds a lot more strength, we don't like certain words, we want to be advocates for, we don't like feminism and all these big, strong words that sounds like, this is just a group doing that thing, but we should all be in it together. Men, we all come from mothers, so, please be kind, to the next woman. You don't want to be having, I just wonder, actually, I don't like the feeling at all, because, when we are in national service, when you're all wet and soaked in don't know what, when you're out in the jungles, and then you imagine women doing that every month, having to have a pet there, bleeding away, and, and then after that, when all goes away, and then now she's having all these hot flushes and this fatigue and muscle aches, and she's like, what is wrong with me? Long zhong tia, And then I'm not that old, right? Look at my face, all the makeup and everything, a cosmetic I put is so beautiful, and yet I'm stuck here and I cannot think. My brain is fogging, and then my boss is looking at me halfway through the thing and staring, So sometimes if a male ally is there and you are team members, rather than trying to outshine, we talk about equity, right, and equality is perhaps time to shine, and help her just take over, like, this part here, over here, right? And then she's like, oh, yes, thank you very much. Little acts like that, supporting each other in some presentations, in some work, when it matters most, because everybody has a different moment at every time in life,
But that's assuming that the men at work understand menopause. And for us as women, is it easy for you to say the word menopause at work? I mean, I find it very hard to even say it, because it is a reflection of age, it's a reflection of weakness as well. So, Sing Bin, as president of the Menopause Society, how can you disrupt this at work?
Well, I think we don't need to use the word menopause, because if you don't feel well, you say I'm unwell. Does it need to have a diagnosis of menopause? In fact, I was just reflecting, I spoke to menopause support group, my own patients, and they say the toughest bosses are not the male, are the female. They'll say, my mother went through menopause without problem, how come you got so much problem? So I think we should be inclusive to say it's not about male or female. everyone needs to understand that as women go through these stages, they could have certain symptoms, and we should be inclusive to say, look, this is, you don't have to tell your boss, I'm going through menopause, I can't sleep well, my mood is having issue. Is there a problem? This person should get proper medical treatment, and with good medical treatment, they can do very well. I mean, I have a patient that had to leave her work, but you know what she told me 3 months later after we treated her, she said, you know, it was a better thing because now I got an even better job. And my previous colleagues were all retrenched in the previous job. So sometimes if we look at it positively, it is how do we manage this. But I think it is good that I hope everyone goes up here thinking that, well, if someone is going through difficult times, we should be supportive regardless of what menopause is or not. Because sometimes we think these are symptoms of menopause. Now, I get patients referred to me and you ask them, I said, yours is not menopause. We diagnosed with a thyroid problem. It can be a medical problem that needs treatment. I just had one with rheumatoid arthritis, and she never even tell me she was diagnosed 20 years ago, and it's only when I mentioned, I'm going to refer you to the rheumatoid. Oh, I saw him 20 years ago. And that's when she remembered she actually had that problem. But she was referred to me for joint pains, which is very common. But if we don't do the proper assessment, the examination, then the woman will go away shortchanged, because then you'll be chasing after, you have, Singapore is very accessible, right? You got palpitation, you'll see the cardiologist. Then he'll do everything, scans, charge you $10,000. You don't have a heart problem? I think you need to see the neurologist and do another scan, another $10,000. By the time you spend $30,000, I think you have menopause. You could come to the generalist who will do the proper assessment in the first place, and it will, I think we're even less than $1,000, right? Quite cheap, lah.
I think Seng Bin brought up 2 very important points. One is, don't always label something as menopause. At this age of being midlife, you probably have to go for screening as well. Do not ignore symptoms, which may be significant and may not be menopausal symptoms. And the second point, of course, is, I think as women, we all go through menopause, and we should be more understanding of our colleagues who face the same challenges, whose symptoms may be worse. Some people have, like, Seng Bin says, barely any symptoms, and some can be quite bad. So I think you should be more, empathetic towards fellow female colleagues. And to the men out there, at least understand what menopause is. And I think we shouldn't be afraid to discuss it as well at work. Okay, so now we move on to career and reinvention. This is a very big part of our being in the midlife, although you may call it a midlife crisis, but it may not be a midlife crisis. It may be a time to pivot and grow. So I would like to ask our panelists here, Razwana first actually, about this perspective on pivoting in midlife, taking the leap.
I would think that I was given a lot of opportunities. I spent close to 20 years in a ministry that used to be known as Ministry of Community Development. That was 20 years ago, right? The ministry changed 4 or 5 names, and then now it's MSF. And I think having that one career really kind of made me realize the differences that many different people face. I was a probation officer. I learned a lot of things from the people that I worked with, all those cases and all that. And somehow I had the opportunity to teach as well at the university. And when I moved to the university, which is very, very recent, it took a long time for me to make that decision. It was not easy to leave the public service to go into the university. And I thought I will go and pursue my restorative justice. And actually I was teaching company and contract law, and I was looking at business ethics and corporate governance. So I was hired in the School of Business, but I think my boss, which is a male boss, very, very supportive provost at that time, thought that maybe I could come up with something new, develop a whole new undergraduate program. I don't know anyone here knows what I do, but the degree is called Public Safety and Security. It's a brand new field. I always feel like I'm trying to sell a product, not just to, it's not so difficult to kind of promote this to the private sector actually, because there's a lot of public safety and security requirement. In fact, pharmaceutical companies take in my interns as well, especially after COVID, because they need public safety and security individuals to do the work in terms of even delivering the drugs and all that. It's a collaboration with the Ministry of Home Affairs, this degree, but I do have problems convincing the parents. During open house, when, after A-levels, after poly, it's encouraging to see that parents still go with their children to all these, open house talks, and they will ask, who can do this degree? What can you do after this degree? I can't really say because I've only got 2 batches of students who have graduated. Apart from those who have graduated and gone back to the Ministry of Home Affairs, they are all our home team officers. But it has been very, very encouraging and successful to see young people who are very enthusiastic in wanting to do this degree when they can actually go and join any other local universities, do anything, apart from public safety and security. So I gained a lot from the enthusiasm that I see in my students who are trying to, go into a field that's totally new and trying to also raise the profile of what public safety and security is about. So that's great. And I think all these challenges is probably what keeps me going. And trying to do new things, at this stage, trying to be, basically I kind of gave up one career and I went into another career. It's not easy. I mean, I have very supportive bosses, both my president and provost at the university. They know that I'm not a typical, lecturer or a professor because I came from the practice background. So when I wanted to do all this other social work stuff, and they say, okay, go ahead, continue to do what you need to do, and they're very, very supportive. Apart from that, I think having supportive bosses, it's also about having role models. I remember the first SAGE last year, Madam Halima, who is now my chancellor, was she gave her final talk, and I think she mentioned this. She said that she has just turned, I think, 72 last year, and she said people still invite her, right, to come in for talks because she didn't want to be invisible. She's not an invisible woman. But a lot of people, when they turn 60, 65, 70, women do become invisible. And I think that is something that perhaps, with all due respect to MOS, the government is doing a lot of things. But I've always wondered, what more can we do? Not just in terms of having, fronting, being the role model and changing policies and all. We all know policies and laws and regulations are, they are just in words, right? It's actually your action and your behavior and how comfortable you are and in talking about certain things. I mean, you're right, we don't have to talk about menopause, but you could be related to mental health issues. It could be just being tired. Can I come in late, because I couldn't sleep last night? But how many people can go and say this in a workplace, right? How do we create that kind of environment? It's not, I think, about just male, female. It's actually the whole environment that we are in, and how can we reduce that pressure and that competitiveness and, wanting to do things in a way that would allow us to be us so that we can contribute effectively. I think that's that part about not wanting to be an invisible woman. Just one other thing, I know our measures and our KPIs are all great. I just came back from Mongolia on an event. We were talking, it's a Women Parliamentarian Caucus event. And, I had fellow, other parliamentarians there. Japan's level of gender equality is like 100 plus, Singapore is number 8. Of course, everybody was looking at Singapore. We are doing fabulous work. But at the same time, if you were to ask a woman, do you still feel tired? Do you still feel unseen? Do you still feel that you need to fight your way, to get somewhere? I think they would say yes. Our study at PPIS, we just did one recently, they still feel the same way. It's not just culture, sometimes it's an intersection between culture and religion. So I would like to ask all of us as well to think about this question. Do we value what we measure, or do we measure what we value? I think that's really important. So if you just have index, which is great, I'm very proud to say that, we are doing really well. But at the same time, can we also have these other measures?
Gee, those are very pressing questions. That's a very good question in itself. And actually, I'm going to put it to our male panelists. How do you handle age, marriage, gender biases, feeling overlooked at the workplace?
I think I should start first. At least in the field of gynecology where I am, we have now so many more female residents and trainees already. So the men are getting the rare species looking after women. So you have more women after looking women as your health specialist. But at the same time, I need to train these women, future women specialists for women. So a lot of the time, is spending to just put all this aside, whether you're a man or woman, but looking after the person in front of us. And I think that, unfortunately, because we do know biology and women, you never see these organs in you, but your ovaries are the one that's ticking away. They're causing you all the symptoms you've ever had. And they should be studied much more. And gynecologists will feel that we're focusing on that. So, to me, I think at the workplace itself, understanding that, there are different life phases everybody has to go through. So younger trainees, they have to get married, they have to have children, they have to get childcare leave. And even now when I'm leading my team, my research area, actually I only got one boy. The rest are all women. So again, it comes to a point that, if they look up to you as their leader or as the senior, I think it's important that we put it that everyone is different, be it men or women, and through the different life phases, the biological needs are different as well. And when it happens, we support them. Of course, when we are in a supportive workplace, everybody will be actually more cohesive as a team because they know that if I have problems, we are a team, we'll look after for each other. It's not men or women, but we are a team. And I think that's an important thing to put it down on the ground.
Yep. Thanks, Zhong Wei. Like Zhong Wei, in my whole department of 10 people, I'm the only guy. So we don't really have much of a gender diversity. In fact, I think we need to fight for men gender equality, male gender equality. And I think it's very important about this diversity because I started the first multi-disciplinary sexual health clinic many years ago where we have the psychologists, physiotherapists, and the doctors as well. And if you have a team of women just looking at sexual health, they will think of certain ways without understanding the other part of the story. I mean, it takes two to have sex, right? You can't be just one person, unless IVF, which...
No, under our legislation, IVF needs a married heterosexual couple in Singapore. That's the law.
So I think it is really understanding the different phase that everyone goes through, not just man or female. Sometimes it could be the man, he's a young father, what do we do to support him? Because you don't support the father, then the mother will be facing stress at her work as well. So how do we see them as a family, supporting them as a family unit as they go through the different phases in life? And we see that because in our younger juniors, they have to go through different parts. Yes, they have to take certain long leave because of certain issues, but you realize that if you are able to help them through that difficult time, they will be able to contribute way more later on in life. And I was just thinking back about my own marriage. I think a lot of times when you have kids, I have 3 kids. When you have kids, after a while, you only focus on the kids. You never spend time as a couple. And the first trip, I was just looking back because I saw some of the questions. I was looking at the picture. It was 2012 when I told my wife, look, the third one is 3 years old. They are 3 years apart, 3, 6, 9 at the time. We said, leave them 3 at home. I'm going to Jeju and join me. And after that trip, we said, wow, we felt like we are having a honeymoon again. So you rekindle your marital relationship. And I think as couples, this is where we need to constantly remind ourselves. You need to spend time away from the kids and still stay as a couple so that as you go through menopause, it's much easier because you have that supportive partner with you. And hopefully when you are 70, you are still happily living together as a couple supporting each other.
Well, that's actually, you've come to a very important part of our topic in midlife We've talked about workplace, but now we should have a few words on life transitions, identity at home, in our own personal lives. And Razwana, you shared earlier, when life doesn't go according to plan, you manage to adapt very quickly without losing self. How did you manage that? And you also have that PPIS study as well, isn't it?
Yes. I think a lot of the times you do have people that you grow up with that you look up to as role models. So there's me and my sister. My mom's from India. She's not she's not educated, I would think. You know, she can only read and write Tamil. But she wanted both me and my sister to be educated somehow. But unfortunately, I think I wouldn't really know this, but I don't know whether my dad was supportive or not. But I studied without his knowledge. The moment he found out I was studying, he got me married. You know, so. But my mom has always been the one who said, no, you know, you got to continue, you got to pursue what you need to do, and subsequently, when I got divorced, of course, it was another nobody ever got divorced in my whole 200 years of, you know, people coming from this particular village. Nobody ever. So it was really, really difficult. But I think all of those struggles made me realize that you can actually overcome certain things. I had to convince both my parents when I was going through that process, because nobody was with me. They were with my ex-husband, actually. So it was really, really difficult. But I learned from both my parents in terms of how you can be resilient. Faith helps as well. And I know for the Muslim studies that we do, a lot of the times your faith and what you believe in, and, you know, you try to pivot your way. Sometimes you just got no control over things, you know. You cannot control another person. You can just control what you see that particular situation is going to be like. So again, I learned a lot from the families that I worked with. I've seen families, you know, who've got no money at all, grandparents who are looking after grandchildren, and 3 of their children are all in prison. You know, I think through those kind of adversity, even though I believe in restorative justice just for that. It's not that I don't believe in deterrence or punishment model. I do. It's just that I believe that people are not born, you know, to become bad people, and they are there because of situations around them. And I've learned how they can overcome those situations, even though sometimes they do go back to prison. That happens. But all of those lessons, right, made me realize that you can actually do this. You just have to rely on yourself. So that's one aspect of it, right? Again, going back to like taking charge of your own health, you know, being able to come forward and get treatment, not just wait for people to, you know, tell you maybe something wrong with you, why don't you go for treatment? It's really taking ownership for yourself, an accountability for yourself. But I think the other aspect is when it comes to caregiving, I was fortunate. I had my mom who looked after the kids while I continued to study. When I was in the ministry, I had very supportive bosses, even in the ministry. 2001, I was allowed to work from home. That was when my son, 24 years ago. So that's the ministry I was in. I'm very proud to be in that ministry even now. MOS, please continue to do the good work that MSF is doing. It's just that we still see sacrifices that we make for family as a sacrifice. And women should not be sacrificing family work, caregiving work, and not being recognized for that, right? I think that's where the imbalance is. So we need to do more. Right? We can have all the skills and all the measurements, yes. We can always allow women to stay home to look after their children. That's fine. But if they choose to do that, what is happening to them after that, right? I mean, at least you're dating your wife, which is good. The children will grow up, right? And then there's no one left behind. And then this mother who's been spending all her life caregiving, looking after her own children, she's left with no other identity, and this is where she becomes invisible all over again. She's not a mother, nobody needs her, nobody needs to cook for her and all that. So I think these are the things that we need to look at if we are looking at being a just society. Just because you're doing caregiving doesn't mean that you are not doing anything. I think, M1S said that you had a negotiation with your wife, the work is equally tiring, right? But we don't know. I don't know because my mom looked after my kids, yes. But I can see it in the people that I work with in PPIS. So I hope, as a society, we can move forward and look at caregiving, look at the support that we're giving to this. We're going to be an aging society. We're already an aging society. So how are we going to help these people who are not employed, not working? Yeah.
Actually, then I'm going to pose that question to Seng Bin, because a lot of us are in a situation where we have to have caregiving duties, like as we are sandwich generation. So, Seng Bin, what are the ways to get help in the Singapore context? It's very easy to say, oh, you can find help, you can look for help, but where do we go to look for help? What are the organizations or support services that can help us?
Okay, so I believe if we keep looking to government for solution, there's always not enough money. Just looking back, I just stepped down as the chairperson of Orkin last year, and for those who know Orkin Singapore, we are quite a proponent of what we call asset-based community development. And if you go down to their community walk, you realize that how do we empower community? They will engage the community and see who are the go-to person in the community, and once you identify those, they will be actively looking out for their neighbors. In fact, I have this lady who was sharing, she said, I'm very poor, I got no money, but I got time. So she linked up the entire community, and when they found out the children in the community are going to school hungry, they started cooking breakfast for them. And even when they wanted to raise money, I was like so impressed. Hey, don't worry, I can find donor. We do 1-for-1 matching. And they were like, don't worry, we can raise the 12,000 ourselves. So they become so empowered that we don't need government anymore. And I think that's what the government wants to see. But it is truly getting the empowerment for the community. I mean, we had a drumming research that I did with Lions Befriender. After the research ended, we had to take away the drums, right? And guess what? The group of seniors bought their own drums. And they started drumming on their own. And as we were very amazed at what's happening, I said, look, rather than treat them like little numbers, when in research we look quantitative, we like to say, oh, how many have improved quality of life? I can tell I'm meeting my biostatistician tonight. He says, Seng Bin, their baseline quality of life is so good. So AIC is doing very good job with AACs, They say, the quality of life is so good that cannot improve anymore. But the stories that's coming out is a different story. He said, this lady, we interviewed a couple separately, my colleague. He said, the husband said, well, the wife said, my husband will never go to AAC program. We know that you go to AAC, the men are very happy, because a lot of girlfriends there. There are more ladies than the men. But the wife said, because when we have this drumming activity, my husband comes down regularly. And the husband actually said, wow, now we can do things together. I think I can really grow old with my wife. So how do we do program that empower the community and not keep getting, what do you want? I give you. That's very disempowering, because it's not coming from the asset base. Because once they are seen as asset to the community, they are motivated to do much more. But if you keep giving them handout, they'll be disempowered, which is why the Scandinavian country has moved towards this ABCD as well.
Thank you. Zhong Wei, can you give us some personal comments and experiences?
Yeah, because we hear married couples, we hear, the community, we hear about the government, but how about the singles? So I do advocate, to find true love is not the easiest thing for both men and women, but we also have caregiving roles, right? Whether you are single, not married, or divorced, or whatsoever. So singles, I think, since there are a lot of advocates and the government here, I think one thing is that, can you also give people in the midlife, because some of us do, and actually may not put priority as having a marriage, but we put family caregiving as the main thing, right? You always have that one child in a family who is looking after everybody else, auntie, uncle, everyone. And what are the benefits that we get? And we worked, right? You start working, you also pay taxes, but then you only get benefits to your family when you're married. Only your children get health benefits. Only your spouse get health benefits. How about the singles? I look after my parents. I look after my not so well brother or not so well sister. How about these people? Right? Do we not have rights to a roof over our head? Do we not also have to support them where they can't get support? So I think this is something that, I thought that, as we move forward as a society, sometimes, yes, we want a family-based society. That should be the core. Not saying that's not. That it should be the core. Yeah.
I'm reminded of this Chinese saying, 眼亲不如近邻. That means the relative that's far away is not as good as the neighbor next to you. So if your neighbors are vibrant, I'm starting to see a very interesting trend. Husband passed away, the neighbor is bringing the wife to the clinic. I say, why are you doing that for your neighbor? Because we feel that they are part of our community and they are supporting, the neighbors are supporting that community. And I just saw on Straits Times, there was an article how the family came together to support the older sister when she has dementia. So how do we grow that community spirit such that our neighbors will support each other?
I think not only that, I think sometimes you just want to get a place nearer, right? To your parent, to that person who depends on you, and you are linked somehow. And then we cannot get priority, right? You can queue only until you get married, and then you get the priority with HDB, and then HDB say that, okay, fine. So I mean, coming from the point of view, right? We all have different life phases and transition, and sometimes we may be a little bit on coming on board. And I think, while the community remains open and warm, I think we should consider that, we don't want to force people into certain molds. Right, and I treasure like what Roswana has actually mentioned that this country gives hope. We want to be at that level. That fact that we are already up on the gender equality moment. How about also be equal in terms of family building and bonding as well? I think that's something really need to consider.
Thank you so much for giving the singles perspective. Very important, but often neglected in this forum. Okay, so I'm very conscious of time, and I would like our panelists here to just round up this discussion by each giving us a little takeaway message. If you could give one piece of advice for thriving in midlife, what would it be? You have 1 minute each, and then we'll go with ladies first.
Okay. I would think that if you think that I actually wanted to say something about caregiving. Can I just say that first? Okay, I think caregiving is priceless to everyone, to our society, right? But it should not be at the expense of either men or women in terms of their lives. I think that's really, really important. So I guess in order to thrive in midlife, we all need to take responsibility for our own, development, I suppose. But at the same time, we should also work. The government need to also look at what are these measures that we are looking at, right? It can't just be, you're male, you're single, you don't have these responsibilities. But perhaps, we need to look at what are those responsibilities that are causing barriers in us achieving the outcome that we want, whether is it midlife, whether is it young people, whether is it, men or women. I think all of those things need to be considered. What are those barriers and how can we remove those barriers instead of, looking at coming up with policies that would only help certain groups because we know it's visible, but the others are not, seen. So I think that will be my last few words.
Thank you. Sengibin?
Yeah, I give you an acronym. Since I believe in lifestyle medicine, that the International Menopause Society white paper just came out, if you want to look at it. Harmony. H for healthy eating. A for active arts participation. R for restful sleep, which is very important. M for mental wellness. O for on your move, that means physical activity. N for no substance abuse. We know the vapes is a big thing now. And the last one, why all of you are doing it, is your social connection. How being socially engaged can improve your health.
Thank you.
I think that harmony wraps up almost everything. But I think the last thing that I would like to really share, and also from the perspective, really we have so many advocates, we have so many partners here. I think to collaborate and to raise that education and awareness, for one's health and body throughout life. And we need to start as early as we can, because if we start late, because women don't know they have a menopause coming when they are 2 years old. They only know they want to eat sweets and look pretty and then, go on to universities and meet a true love of their life. So I think we need to raise awareness. We need to start educating early. We need to know early so that by the time we are midlife, we are prepared. And we need to stop being reactive, but being forward-thinking and have foresight. And I think that's what, it will make us thrive in the midlife, because then, just like what Singapore is, because we have foresight, because we have planned. So now that we are in midlife, we are 60 years old. so that's why, so we are thriving till now. And I think that should continue, and we should even start earlier for everyone and for our children in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, well done, panel. I think they have given us really important insights and tips. We have a few minutes for questions now. Let me look if there are any burning questions. Okay. First question is, even when menopause symptoms go away, the hormones that are still lower than before menopause. What about HRT? Can we normalize HRT?
Maybe I take this question. A lot of people don't understand that your symptoms do not occur when your hormone is the lowest. In fact, it's fluctuating. And really, it is a fluctuation that causes all the symptoms. And that's why sometimes when we treat, there's no such thing as I'm replacing. We don't even need to replace now. And a small little, most of the people do with very little dose of the hormones that release their symptoms. But I can assure you, if you do your lifestyle of harmony, it can affect. And many times what I do is I ask my patients, they are very stable. Then once they get promoted, the symptoms come in. And they start to realize that, well, it is my lifestyle. If I have a good sleep tomorrow, I have no symptoms. So what do? Do I up the medicine or the hormones? Or do I look into my lifestyle? This is really something we have to discuss. Some people can cope, some people like to use the lifestyle, but it's all like human beings, right? We will prefer to take a tablet than to change the way I eat, the way I move. So I feel, and if you look at it, the older you are, the lesser hormones you need. So this HRT, we have actually all the international society, we have removed this term called hormone replacement therapy, because we don't replace. It is, we are just supplementing. And there's this big talk about, because we don't give women hormone, they die younger and so on. But I can assure you, after WHI, in the past, polyclinic used to give hormone therapy. Many years ago. Almost every other woman will be on hormone therapy. But after WHI died and hormone died, did women live longer? Actually, our life expectancy for women actually increased. It's not the hormone that increased the life expectancy, it's the lifestyle, the good care, and the environment that has created this improvement in the longevity.
Okay, that was a great question. Thank you for the answer. I'm very conscious that we have actually run out of time. We have to leave the stage before Sochin beats me up. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Zhong Wei, Razwana, Seng Bin. It's been a pleasure being on the panel with you.